Welcome to the Design Principles for Middle School Career Exploration webinar. This is the first of two series that are designed to create an effective middle school exploration program for your school and district. With us today, Morgan Lovett will be helping to produce this webinar, and my name is Teresa Rogers, and we both serve as consultants in the Office of Career and Technical Education with the Kentucky Department of Education. Here you see an overview of the webinars that we have designed to implement career studies. Series 1 is designed for school leaders, district administrators, looking at the big picture of middle school career exploration. What are the design principles and what are some planning and implementing options for your school or district? The second series that we have focuses on what career studies looks like in the classroom. So keep these in mind. These will be available on the Kentucky Department of Education media portal. So as we start today, let's take a few minutes to talk about why we need to engage in this work. According to Georgetown University, we know that 44% of all good jobs in Kentucky, those that pay at least $35,000 a year for workers aged 25 to 44, are held by people who have not earned a bachelor's degree. This includes people who have earned a certificate, completed some post-secondary education, or even just earned a high school degree. In all, there are about 30 million good jobs for these people, jobs that provide access to the middle class. This image from KY Stats shows the 2019 outcome for students who graduated in 2011. There are 100 figures on the board, and each represents 433 students. You can see that 7 years after graduating, 22% earned a bachelor's degree or higher, 6% earned an associate's degree, and 3% completed an industry certificate or credential. The largest group that I have highlighted in red, this group had of 44%, they had some college experience, but they were unable to graduate within 7 years. And then finally, you can see the 10 individuals, 25% of our students did not seek post-secondary education. You can find information that's specific to your county at KY Stats. We also want to consider that 80% of jobs require some form of post-secondary education or credentialing. However, that focus on a four-year degree, it fails to take into account that 54% of those programs take 1 year or less to complete. These short-term programs are especially valuable to our non-traditional students who now make up the vast majority of students in the post-secondary education world, because they provide pathways that can be completed in far less time and cost than conventional degree programs. It does not mean that they forego a goal of a four-year degree if that's their choice, but it's one step that they're intentionally making to increase their success and maybe lower some of their costs as well. We also want to consider the 1-to-7 job ratio. We know that in the United States economy, for every one job that requires a master's degree or higher, there are 2 jobs that require a bachelor's degree and 7 jobs that require a 1-year certificate or a 2-year degree. According to Mark Perna, this was true 50 years ago, and it will hold true as we move into the future. And consider what that might mean for your students. We know that college debt now averages about $37,000 per student, And we know that many students aren't making enough money to pay back those loans. And that probably includes a lot of those students that are in that red box who entered college, probably incurred some student loan debt. For whatever reason, they dropped out carrying that student loan debt, and we don't know what their income levels are and if they're able to pay that back. But we do know that more than 1 million people default on their student loans every year, and that risks their access for credit that we need to purchase a home, get a cell phone, get an apartment, so many things that are critical to our economy. We also have to consider that it is a matter of equity. Student loan borrowers are mostly from Black neighborhoods, or that are from mostly Black neighborhoods. They are more than twice as likely to default on their debt as borrowers from neighborhoods that are mostly white. One of the major reasons for that is because students of color, they need to borrow more money to pay for college because their families have far less wealth to draw on to help them cover those costs. So we have to consider this as an equity issue. We also have to consider that equity because we know that many low-income students of color may have limited knowledge about their potential career opportunities, and they may have less access to role models within the workforce. They may fear or assume that they'll be alienated or marginalized in certain career fields. So we have to put this at the forefront of the reason we do this. So what does middle school career studies look like? We're going to draw from information from Advanced CTE in a report that they recently published called Broadening the Path. It identifies the outcomes for student learning, and it lays out the design principles and the core programmatic elements of a quality middle school CTE program. So we're going to dive into each of these sections as we move through the webinar. The outcomes that we want for our students. Middle school students, we're not asking them to choose a career. Rather, we want them to gain awareness of and exposure to a wide array of careers. We want to increase their self-awareness and begin to form their potential occupational identity. We want to help them develop employability skills and foundational technical skills where it's appropriate. And we want them to be positioned to make better informed educational choices as they transition to high school with an actionable plan for next steps. Our design principles that we will look at individually, we want our program to be equitable and inclusive of every student. It needs to be anchored in careers and standards based. It needs to be grounded in experiential and hands-on learning, and it needs to balance the breadth and depth across the curriculum. It needs to be integrated into that broader K-12 or P20 even career development system, and it needs to include intentional and meaningful employer engagement. It needs to involve dedicated instructional time, and we need to consider how we are communicating this information to students and their families, as well as we need to focus our work on student growth. Our first principle that we're going to look at is we want every student to engage in middle school CTE regardless of their achievement level. It's important to remember that CTE clusters and pathways are inclusive of all careers and range from entry-level positions through doctoral degrees. So the school schedule should ensure that students don't have to choose between a career studies or CTE course and pursuing other interests such as fine arts or sports. Students receiving remediation should have access as well. So this will require that instruction is scaffolded, but it has the potential to motivate and engage students at a point in time when they are at risk of disengaging from their learning. We want middle school career studies to be anchored in careers. Students should explore a breadth of careers and engage in projects or activities that connect to those careers. They should engage in career-related skills and tasks that are developmentally appropriate through hands-on projects and lab activities so that they can identify what their interests and aptitudes are. And teachers and students and counselors should use labor market information to identify and research career options. We want our programs to be standards-based. So the state has developed or revised the old vocational study standards to the new career studies standards document. These integrate academic, technical, and employability skills, and it provides specific statements about what learners should be able to know and do at the end of that 6 to 8 grade band. These are available on kystandards.org, as well as resources to help your teachers break those down to determine what it looks like in their content areas. It should be grounded in experiential and hands-on learning. We've already mentioned that they should have opportunities to participate in authentic tasks related to careers. However, we know that teachers will need ongoing professional development that focuses on how to embed that information or that experience into their instruction. It needs to be balanced across the breadth and depth of the curriculum. What we mean by that is students over that course of 6th to 8th grade, within that 3 years, they should have been exposed to all of the 16 career clusters. They should have the opportunities, however, once they've identified 2 or 3 clusters that they are interested in, they should have an opportunity to learn more deeply about that career cluster through additional research or projects or engagement with employers. So they should also be able to explore what that pathway looks like in their community, their region or states. What are the job openings for that career locally as well as nationally? And it needs to be integrated into the broader K-20 development system. Kentucky academic standards for career studies, these range from K to 12. So there is a continuum of the standards from kindergarten to 12th grade that are to be implemented in a developmentally appropriate manner. So when we think about the student's ILP, we know that in Kentucky, the ILP starts at the 6th grade. So providing opportunities for students to discover their interest in order to determine what their ILP looks like. And our teachers and counselors at the middle school level need to know what's happening at the elementary and especially at the high school level so that students can have knowledge of those opportunities. And integrating these into content areas can really engage students and help them to relate content to their future. We think of career studies. We know that it needs to be inclusive and intentional for employer engagement. When we think of middle grade CTE standards, these are informed or validated by the employer partners. At the high school level, we bring in employers and business partners within our community to develop those standards so that they are validated by what students need when they graduate. So that is a critical part of career studies. But at the middle school level, how do you engage employers? How do you put employers and middle school students together? They can bring in programs or tasks or problems to share with students to help students make that connection between the academics that they're learning and what they may see themselves doing years down the line. We also know that it needs to be inclusive of dedicated instructional time. We need to make sure that there are clear requirements and qualifications in place for middle grades CTE teachers. And while we have middle grade CTE teachers, we know that the career study standards is intended to be implemented by regular content teachers within our middle schools. They will need some professional learning to identify where those career connections occur within their curriculum and how that they might provide engagement activities for students with those careers. And we want to consider CTE courses in the middle grades. Those vary from school district to school district, and how they choose to do that varies. But consider how that might look in your school. Is it going to be a course, or can you implement an effective program in other manners, such as with advisor-advisee time, mentor periods, integrating content into different curriculum areas? But whatever that we do, those activities need to be meaningful for students. We need to consider how we communicate this to students and their families, because students may have exposure to a wide range of careers that their parents are not familiar with. What tools and resources can we provide for them? Do we need to consider materials in other languages, or how do we provide those pieces of information to support parents so that they can support and guide students on that appropriate path for them? And we want career studies to be focused on student growth. So what are the pieces of data that we need to collect? It needs to be authentic, and it needs to contribute to improving our program. We also need to consider how that is implemented. What are the programmatic elements of middle grade CTE? We're going to be looking briefly at standards, at course activities, scheduling and advisement, experiential learning. What are the needs of teachers and leaders, as well as data measurement? When we consider standards and curriculum and assessment, we need to consider how the standards are aligned with or integrated into other middle grades standards. So in the second series of webinars, we address this a lot deeper to help teachers see those connections and where they can best support their students. So consider the standards that the students will be using. The second thing we need to consider is the structure and the scheduling. So how do we structure this in such a way that all students have access? Because we do not want students to have to choose between band and career studies. What can we do to eliminate barriers to participation and success in our courses for students that are marginalized or as part of a special population? How do we make that more accessible to them? And do we incorporate those standards into the curriculum, or do we only deliver those in isolation? And then we need to consider, is there enough time and space that's dedicated to middle grade CTE to allow for hands-on experiences both within and outside of the school day? We need to think about career advisement. Do counseling professionals get the supports, the training, and the tools that's necessary to deliver an effective career advisement at the middle school grade levels? We also need to consider that teachers are doing a lot of the career advising. So when we talk about career advising, are we supporting our classroom teachers with the knowledge and the tools that they need to have those career conversations with their students as well? What do counselors and teachers need to be able to engage students in creating an individualized learning plan that is appropriate to their needs and their goals? We also want to consider experiential learning. Are there activities for students that are available at the middle grades? Are there CTSOs or career and technical student organizations that they can be involved in? Are there student organizations at the high school level that can support middle school students and engaging in some of those tasks? Are there clear standards for experiential learning opportunities for students? And do the educators have enough time and resources and supports that they need to be able to implement that experiential learning piece? When we say work-based learning at the middle school level, that's much different than what we see at the high school level. We're talking about those experiential activities for students that mirror tasks and problems within the workplace. We've already mentioned teachers, but do they understand the full principles and goals of middle school CTE? That's probably one of the first pieces that I would begin in my work in developing or revamping my middle school program. You need to consider how all teachers and staff in the school can be involved in delivering career development experiences for students, as well as professional development to support them to do that. The second series that we have provides those resources and those supports. And we want to consider what are the indicators for success for middle grades programs. We don't want middle grade CTE just to be a recruitment tool for our high school programs, but we want it to be an experience for students to engage with multiple pathways. So as we consider this, I encourage you to investigate this document. There's a lot more information that we just did not have time to share from the Broadening the Path document from Advanced CTE. They go into each of the principles and programmatic elements much deeper. There is also a self-assessment tool that you may want to begin to work with a small team of individuals to really determine where your school or district is at. It's readily available, and there'll be a link on our webpage for this. Also, with next steps, I encourage you to explore the resources on the Middle School Career Studies page. You can find this very easily from the Kentucky Department of Education webpage just by searching Middle School Career Studies. It will lead you directly here. The next webinar that would be extremely helpful for planning your program is the Planning and Implementing Middle School Career Studies. There is an implementation toolkit located under school resources for teams to use at your school that highlights all of the different options available. It is not prescriptive, but it's meant to give you some ideas of what you might like to do for your school. Again, a list of the webinars that are available on the Kentucky Department of Education media portal. Remember, Series 1 is that broader overview of middle school career studies, whereas Series 2 gets into the actual implementation of these standards within the classrooms. If you need more information, please reach out to one of us, Morgan Lovett or Pam Moore or myself. We would love to talk to you more about middle school career studies. Thank you, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon.